Originally in Spanish. The subject of the holistic society has a complicated element to be discussed at this point. We have said that the basis of the holistic society depends on the spirituality, ethics, and morals of a people. But spirituality, ethics, and morals, that's sort of super compressed terms, so that we don't have to explain that in detail while talking about the main subject of the holistic society. But if we do turn our attention to look more closely at these 3 points, we find strong problems of definition and description. It turns out that in defining spirituality, morality, and ethics, we find that they are not even the appropriate words, or one more than the other, because all 3 carry a load of meanings that turn out to be relative to each person or group. For example, morality versus ethics. It turns out that morals, that's something pertaining more to religion, while ethics is more expanded. However, there are whole books just to define those 3 things. As for spirituality, 90% or more of the terrestrial population takes it as part of religion, as in it goes hand in hand. Religion is spirituality, or religion is to get spirituality. As for ethics, and this goes for morality as well, what is ethical for one person or group of people will not be ethical for others. And furthermore, that changes with the passage of time. So we find that it is not possible to define ethics, morality, and spirituality based on how they are seen on earth. It is worth mentioning that I do not find any translation or equivalent of morality outside of earth, so it seems something inherently associated with religion. Off earth, you do have ethics, but not morality as such. So it is quite difficult to define those 3 things for the public, since each one will understand the message according to who he is and his cultural and personal background, thus creating distortions of our information. So this would end up forcing us to define what spirituality, morality, and ethics are for us who are describing and writing this. However, even here, we would then be imposing a series of norms to follow that would only end up destroying the very concept of holistic society by turning it into a rigid structure based solely on our perception and definition of those 3 points. So I have no choice but to go deeper. So going deeper, I insist that mentioning ethics, morality, and spirituality is describing things in a simplified way in order to describe a point, the previous one. But the very basis of the holistic society would come from the total mentality of a people. the new society that will inherit the earth, they already have it. That is to say, that they are destroying the present human society at planetary level, but they have already made and structured and formed and in operation the new human society that will follow. It's already there. They already have it. It's not going to be formed by changing the normal people on the street, because they are unpredictable, even with nanographene and all that they will only use to lead the society to destruction.
And how would that society be? Total slavery?
Total slavery, yes, but formed from below, where even as total slaves, they will not see it, because they do not know any other form or social structure than the one they were born into. That is why it is not feasible for them to want to transform modern society towards transhumanism and tyranny, as many say. Because for them it is easier to form a new social structure with a new controlled human mentality than to change an already existing social structure and human mentality like the one that is on earth now. So what they have done is to form a human mental structure that fits into their controlled New World Order society. And already having that in hand and functioning, then destroy until completely erasing the current human society on a planetary level, and then inheriting the earth to their previously prepared and controlled society. And the present society and all their agendas of transhumanism and social control turn out to be only measures to control said population while they destroy it, using them all, and in all countries, as a test laboratory to develop and perfect their new society. They already have the new one. Now they just need to destroy the current one, remove the unusable to introduce the new. That is what I see them doing. But who will be left in the end? I know, yes, those they are interested in, but what kind of people are they interested in? Not the unvaccinated, right? And those who took it are useless. So which ones will they keep? They have people who have already been genetically changed by them and who have never lived outside of that kind of slavery. They have secretly prepared cities to populate with them. Those people are already there. Many of them in already controlled places, but some of them, as a test, walk among the normal population. But they are fewer. And I am talking about the number of inhabitants that the earth is said to have as written in the Georgia stones.
And in Egypt, they are creating a great city that is now empty.
And in China, and in various parts of the Sahara and the subterranean bases. And I don't doubt that in some other parts of the world that we haven't seen. But most of those pre-prepared cities are in China, in the north. But that transhumanist, ultra-repressive world they talk about is not what the controllers are aiming for. It is not what they are looking for as an end product. That is only one step or series of steps to be taken for the total destruction of today's society. Necessary steps to prevent people from organizing against them, since the people are many and they are few. The final product would be an ultra-modern, almost utopian society, where the inhabitants are super-controlled at the genetic level and at the level of thought, to the degree that they will not know they are, because they do not know another world, another way of existing. Very technological, but with a government that, from our point of view, will be repressive and tyrannical. But the inhabitants of that post-reset society will not know it, nor will they have any memory of the current society. And they will again be given a false history of humanity prepared by the controllers and perfected without the old holes of modern or current religions and mind control systems. They tell you this, all of you, but you have no eyes to see. When you are told that you will have nothing, nothing will be your property, but you will be happy, for example. That would be the end result, the one they are seeking. A totally controlled society that doesn't know any other way to live, that sees this repression and total control as normal and accepted, and with a false staged past that the controllers invent for them. But the important things to say here, and I don't think anyone is saying it online, is that this super-controlled, tyrannical, transhumanist world that you see coming is not the end result. Because it turns out that just as we can't implement a real holistic society because of the current human mentality, the controllers can't implement their super-controlled utopian New World Order world either, because of the same mentality of the current people. This is a super important point. So what they must do is cultivate people with genetics and a mindset appropriate to their interests and plans, and then introduce them ready-made into a society they have by design. In the same way that we, for example, also cannot introduce a real holistic society without people progressing mentally and in consciousness towards the right direction first. That is, developing spirituality, morality, and ethics that I spoke of in the previous article, using those words for lack of better ones, as I have already explained above. So, stated clearly, and without measuring myself, or worrying about if I look socially appropriate or not, in both cases, either to introduce a new world order or to introduce a real holistic society, it requires the destruction of the current terrestrial society and the transcendence, death, of most of its inhabitants. I know it sounds horrible, but it is the sad and disturbing truth. However, unlike a new world order and its plans, what we can offer or say is that a transitional society with a view to an improvement in the quality of life of people already alive can be given without resorting to genocide. But this would depend on a restructuring of the current society in small steps, but in the direction of empowering people and not destroying them. This is where Taygeta's proposal to the local federation comes in, a proposal of 2021 that was promptly denied. Knowing that to implement such a proposal or any similar move, the cabal on earth, the misnamed elite, would have to give up their power systems. And that they will not do, leaving the situation as one of survival choice of the elite or survival of the earth population. This situation causes the federation to be exposed as permissive and as supporting the elite, as mentioned before, causing innumerable problems and frictions between the very races of the federation, especially between the Illyrian races and the non-Illyrians, because of complex cultural differences between them, of perception of reality, such as empathy and perception of emotions, which are not equal between the very so-called positive races. But yes, it will be possible to implement progressive societies or political systems with a view to implement a holistic society in the future. But for me to say that a real holistic society cannot be implemented on earth is because of the very mentality of the people on earth. At present, they do not have the mentality or base of consciousness necessary to form a holistic society. And since people do not really change as a rule, then they would irremediably return to form the same conditions that caused the present disaster. Because people shape their governments and their reality, whether they like it or not. People would only change if they were immersed in a dominant frequency. That is to say, introducing a minority of normal-minded but good humans, they would adopt or follow the rules and norms and mentality of an existing holistic society, as happens when human people are extracted and introduced to another culture on another planet like Taygeta, for example. However, yes, a transitional society can be implemented on Earth. How advanced it is will depend on the people themselves. So will how long it will take to develop a real holistic society. You see, what people outside say about a holographic society is not a real holistic society like the one that already exists but on other planets. And it only looks like utopia. But it is not. It only depends on the mentality and the level of consciousness of its inhabitants.
I understand, thank you. What do you mean by this above? Cultivating people with genetics? Like human farms?
Yes. This brings us to another point that I want to clarify or make very clear to the people. It is not that there was no genetic manipulation to the human body. For example, in Sumeria and later. This is happening even right now. It's just that in addition to the artificial genetic change, a mentality of perception must be introduced in people that sustains such artificial genetic change. Or else, people will revert their genes to reflect their souls, for lack of better words, as is also happening today with the so-called Great Awakening. and what is also causing people to be genetically changed again today with injections and nanographene, which is basically black goo, because nanographene is component of black goo, or some black goo, because there are many, or 3 major groups: positive, negative, and natural. So the genetics must be artificially altered. And then a perception of reality must be formed in the changed individual for his mind to sustain the artificial genetic change. 2 steps: artificial change sustained by change of perception. And this brings us back to the above. They will not be able to execute their ultimate utopian transhumanist New World Order society with the mindset and perception of reality of the current world population, which causes them to have to eliminate them. Because the new population they have ready to replace the current human population already has, by design and necessarily, a changed and controlled perception mentality that is in accordance with the artificial genetic changes they have already made to them.
It is all well orchestrated, and people will have no way or means to differentiate what their thoughts are from those that are imposed with artificial telepathy, and there is no way for them to see that their perceptions are being influenced.
They are not going to realize it because they have never lived outside of that social paradigm. And this is exactly what already happened on Earth with controlled perception for thousands of years, accentuated in the last 200 years, because it is more of the same. People were already artificially altered, and then sustained with mind control to guide a deterministic and limited perception of life to sustain the genetic changes applied on them. Being that initially no artificial genetic alteration was necessary, but mind control and perception of reality was sufficient to sustain a world as desired by the controllers. But I do accept that there have been artificial genetic alterations to the human genome in the past. This is where I do differ somewhat from the information given by my predecessor, SWARUU of Erra, who I recall had in mind empowering the human race over having to accept that they were artificially altered. Because, as she said, it is not an impediment, nor are they limited, because if the mind is liberated, it controls and changes the DNA of the individual and returns it to reflect their consciousness' original source.
I understand that they will give technology to the population to guide their perceptions to another reality. Yes.
Basically, all the base reality information they give to humans is false. And so they will give it again. More lies. That's how they will give it to the inhabitants of their new world order. And again, I insist that both the Bible, Old and New Testament, and the Sumerian tablets, books of Enoch, and so forth, are nothing more than more Bibles made with a view to control the perception of reality of the inhabitants of Earth. Quick question, YAZHI. You have said here that the creation of a holistic society also requires the destruction of a large part of the population. What do you mean here? Is elimination of the people then also necessary for that? But we are fighting against that. Or are we really not fighting against that, but for some starseeds to survive, with whom later new societies will be implemented? Aneka said that she sees other options that the Cabal does not see. Restructuring everything with non-human mentors. Could you please clarify this part a bit? You cannot build a truly holistic society with the people who are in mass majority on planet Earth today. People do not change enough, and they will go back to the bad attitudes they caused. So to implement the holistic society, you must evolve, and that means that one way or another, you must or will have to cause the destruction of the current Earth society and culture. You cannot fill a glass with something new if the glass is already full. But that does not mean that you should eliminate those who are alive today. It does not mean that elimination should take place. As I was saying, you can and must provide a progressive new social base toward the right direction toward holistic societies. But you must evolve in that direction at your pace, without the intervention that keeps you trapped in deterministic and victim mentality, that keeps you locked into the so-called 3D matrix. Good. It was necessary to clarify that the elimination of society to implement the new one does not have to mean destroying people. It is never necessary to kill, and it is never an option. But the fact here is that we know that as a mass, the people, the population that determines the dominant frequency of consciousness and thought on Earth, will not change in or during a single incarnation, the present one that concerns us. As we have said before, you cannot force people to change. You can only offer them a better choice. But people on Earth, yes, they have mentality bases that they should change, and that I will explain later. But good luck with modifying the whole society, their mentality in that direction, as they are already programmed and with a fractalized and broken or fragmented mind consciousness because of the mind control they are subjected to with the trauma base, MK Ultra. It is possible to evolve within the same incarnation. Of course it is, and many souls achieve it. The problem is that the social mass will not be able to. What concerns us here is the mass or majority that forms the current human society, and those will not evolve in such a short time. This creates the need to cause a social dynamic that will lead them in the right direction. The first step is the elimination of negative interference. Because I see that if the human being is not interfered with, he has a tendency to gravitate towards a positive direction. Proof of this is that everything that is causing a lag in human development is of artificial intervention origin, such as the economy, the religious bases that dominate and control spirituality, ethics, and morals, and also all the manipulation in the media in the form of mind control that dictates the mass of the general population how they should live and what values and aspirations they should have. Not to mention false flags and all that, which is more trauma-based perception manipulation, with a view to impose MK Ultra characteristics, trauma causing mindset change to the direction the controllers desire. It is all mind control. However, the matrix or the database that shapes and governs life on 3D Earth is totally artificially manipulated with the view to perpetuate agendas and interests of the few. Another example of this is the direct manipulation by the controllers through governments of everything concerning human trafficking, drugs, and organized crime, among others, which is not a direct consequence of the human mentality as such, but is a social response to the manipulation of the controllers, with a view to impose fear, MK Ultra bases, in order to control society. Many times, also with a view to simply stop the progress of human consciousness. Just by withdrawing that kind of intervention, we would have the basis for humanity as a mass to move towards a direction that corresponds to a truly holistic society. It is not necessary to disincarnate to evolve, because sometimes you evolve a lot in the same incarnation, and many other times you can live many incarnations without evolving, as is quite common on Earth with its loops of reincarnation to which its population is subjected. And how does this having to intervene in this way fit in with what we always say, that they have to help themselves without interventions? And so it would have to be. They should evolve as a mass at their own pace, because we cannot impose a way of being on them. However, as I said above, even with their character flaws common to all humanity, yes, they have a clear tendency to develop in a positive direction if the regressive intervention is removed. So just by removing the cabal, the controllers, they would begin to move as a mass towards the positive. However, this is also a theory, because seen from a more expanded level or point of attention of consciousness, we see that they are not a single race, only from the point of view of the biological body, because inside what manages them turns out to be a whole range or zoo of entities or species using the same biosuit, which increases the difficulty of what we wish to achieve. So, the withdrawal of the intervention of the regressive forces, cabal controllers, should also include the withdrawal of humans or entities in human biosuit of regressive tendency, to remove those who are considered regressive hybrids from the human population, to prevent them from continuing to intervene with their destructive mentality. And this can be achieved with the influencing the awareness of the human population over time of what truly makes up or forms a race or species. And this, coupled with the new positive progressive trends, will create a toxic environment that is not conducive to the life of such regressive hybrids. But this again requires several generations, or at least one more, where the entire population of human biosuits will be completely regenerated. But the cabal comes from the people themselves, doesn't it? Forcibly withdrawing it will have short-term results only, won't it? Then it would come back if people's mentality doesn't change. As I have explained before, The cabal, the controllers, whoever they are and at whatever level they are an egregor formed by the mass mentality of the human population. Change the mass mentality and those egregors cannot remain. All the mind control that the human race is being subjected to is for self-maintenance in power, in existence. That is the famous lush. It is creative attention based on suffering that causes the attention focused on the feeding of these kinds of entities and organizations. Now, mentioning what I said above, the things that the human population must change that I consider as attributes that only cause problems for everybody is that they always have a mentality of determinism, of victims and suffering, of only seeing what exists in the material world as the real thing. Also, the fact that the human being has a great tendency to stay in his comfort zone if he is not forced to move forward because his comfort zone is no longer so comfortable, caused by a whole host of reasons, such as the very consequences of wanting to stay in that comfort zone, which causes them to delegate their power and causes other regressive-minded people who encourage the creation of other egregor entities to take control over them under the promise of continuing to feed their comfort zone and end up dominating and controlling all their lives. It ends up forming the controlling egregor-like cabal that reflects the average human mentality. Having studied and observed the behavior of the human race over the last 3,000 years, how they react to what stimulus and what causes them stimulus, controlled historical events, I see clearly that the mass of the human population, even with its faults, has a strong tendency towards progressing in the right direction. They have an enormous tendency to want to be in peace, calm, enjoying life and the simple things, without wanting further complications. But that same mentality of seeking to be at peace is the result of their perception of not being at peace as a consequence of having delegated their power to members of their society who get stimulated by power of all kinds. And that is because of what they have lived through before, their personal experiences, often traumatic, that form that egocentric and unempathic predatory mentality, which in turn generates the egregors in the form of regressive entities without connection to the original source, who for that reason depend on the creative attention of the human being based on the perception and feeling of the average mentality of the mass of the human population, creating a vicious loop circle which must also be broken and which humanity must transcend. So this means that the mass of regressive entities in the form of hybrids of races like Maitre and reptilians, called by others Vlash hybrids, description from the Charistus point of view, is reduced in comparison with the rest of the mass of souls, for lack of a better name, in human biosuit. So by dominant frequency or by mass human attitude or mentality, life on earth will no longer be compatible with the appearance and existence of hybrid entities of regressive races. This can be clearly seen in Taygeta, which on more than one occasion tried to be invaded in multiple ways, such as the importation of agendas and mind control with a view to dominate the population. These efforts will create disturbances in the society, but they do not stick, they do not remain, and they will be eliminated by the same mentality and the level of consciousness of the mass population of Taygeta or any other society with strong holistic society foundations. Yes, but how to change this mentality if we also agree that it is super difficult because there are so many species in humans? And how many generations would that require? At least 1 or 2 total generations. That is to say that the members of the previous one that have not been able to evolve in life in a satisfactory way are no longer alive. That is to say, to remove the influence of attitudes and values that previously were the source of the 3D human matrix feeding it.
What I don't understand is that if we are a reflection of those above, how have they solved it being a zoo of races too, just not focusing on the regressive?
Because the zoo of races, or within it, there is a progressive majority with all their differences, creating on Earth a reflection or microcosmos copy of the Federation, or the dynamics of relationships between races and species of at least this quadrant of the galaxy, all compressed and summarized on Earth. But being that the positive races are the dominant ones in quantity on Earth, it could be summarized that there are 2 great groups of beings that form the terrestrial 3D matrix. 1, the positive ones as a mass set. 2, the regressive ones also as a mass set. Today, with the appearance of an enormous amount of starseeds, coupled with other complex causes, a separation of 2 worlds has been created on Earth. Those who desire the positive and to progress towards more holistic societies, and those who desire to perfect their dystopian, regressive, transhumanist matrix. So, this is the nature of the struggle from the soul level. 2 very large forces clashing right now, where the vast majority are under the control of the regressive tendencies, either actively or just as pawns for following the system. As explained in the movie documentary Matrix, anyone still connected to the Matrix will be an agent of the system, and with it will defend it. But although in a minority of numbers, there is another large progressive mass that desires the development of a more just society with holistic tendencies, mostly due to the influence of people's souls, for lack of a better name, in the form of starseeds that, although few in number, their planetary range of influence is much greater than that of the regressives, creating now a real and strong struggle between 500 sheep zombies controlled by Cabal controller egregors against 5 Urma lions armed to the teeth. Excuse the simile. So even if the starseeds are at a numerical disadvantage of 10,000 against 1, the strength of the fight is very intense, not to say balanced. The battle is more than anything spiritual, of consciences, of mind against mind. And it is only reflected in the physical world with the current chaos. The action is on the spiritual side, but it is fought also from the physical side, as we are doing together now. It looks like a little. It is not. It is everything. The struggle is of minds, of knowledge. Remembering once again that those against whom you fight is against yourselves, which is then reflected as egregors like the Cabal. This is of utmost importance. Removing that defeatist, deterministic human mentality, the mentality of small children who depend on authorities to solve their existence, will automatically eliminate the Cabal and the rest of the egregors that afflict humanity today. They are only their reflection. This is noticed and seen simply because the Cabal depends on humanity to give them power. If they do not cooperate, then nothing will feed the Cabal, and it will have to disappear. Those who support the Cabal are more egregors and personal tulpas, which we can also describe as regressive hybrids, which are just more arms of the Cabal, which, I insist, is only a reflection of the human mentality. When people say that there are those with a lot of power who are repressing them, mostly old, decrepit mummies who only live by taking adrenochrome, I will tell them, who gave them that power if not the people themselves by obeying what in their minds they regard as authorities, but are only a product of their mentality of delegating their own power? Thank you, YAZHI. And one question. You said that humans have positive tendencies. Positive tendencies, yes, but they have still created and manifested the existence or closeness of these hybrids and negative entities. They came out of them and they're subconscious, right? So they not only have positive tendencies, because they have also created circumstances and environment to be parasitized. Or at least that's what I have understood so far. Yes, because that is another layer of all this. The creation of loops or vicious circles, where the dark, fragmented parts of the human psyche are created by trauma that they have inflicted on themselves because of the same mentality, either personally with defeatist attitudes when they know it should not be so, up to the formation of strong egregors such as governments and Cabal, which in themselves are a reflection of the internal chaos of each human being that is reflected outwardly, giving once again example to the saying that people have the governments they deserve because of their mentality. So once again, I will say that the key is to change themselves. Work on themselves, as I have said many times before. And ideally, everyone en masse should work on themselves. And in the eradication of personal and self-thought forms that are keeping them in victim mentality and in determinism destructive to personal progress, and with it, to the progress of society and planetary culture, resulting in them moving in the positive direction and towards the development of a holistic society that is appropriate for them, and by unique and proper design that corresponds to them for each step or level that they have as a mass population.